Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
So temperatures are falling. I think the frosts are a little bit more intense now.
Oh, we had a freeze last night here.
It smells like winter.
Felt like winter. I had my scarf and my hat on today. Got out my warm coat and another pair of socks. My body's not ready for 30 degrees.
Yeah, if you have those automatic car starters, now's the time to get in the habit of doing that again.
I have mixed thoughts on those automatic car starters.
Well, if you have indoor parking, no sweat. But if you don't, it can make things easier. I get you.
So my thoughts on automatic car starters are that they are very handy and they serve a really great purpose, especially if you live in a cold climate and you have like small children or something like that. But for those people that will start their car and then have a cup of coffee and then go out, that's too long. It just needs to be on long enough to get your windows cleared and I can't stand walking down my neighborhood and I'll go around the block with the dog a couple times and this car will be started and I'll come back around the block and it'll still be there. And it's just like, why? It's such a waste. So that's just my personal pet peeve there.
Well, I want to say that the auto car starts have like a 15-minute time limit or something. I know you can't go
I
anywhere.
don't know.
Because I know you can't go anywhere until you come back in and sync with your fob.
Right.
Key.
Well, and that's for the ones that come with the cars. There's aftermarket ones too.
Yeah. Or maybe they just go out there, turn it on, and leave it on with the keys in it.
Then you're less likely to go too far too long, right?
All right. Well, I love how our intros go into these
completely non-related topics.
I know, these unrelated tangents that have nothing to do with what we wanted to talk about, which is green things, right? In fact, a very specific green thing.
My favorite green thing.
We're going to talk about hemlocks. So a little bit about the hemlocks. There's an eastern hemlock and a western hemlock.
And there's a Carolina hemlock.
Canadian. So all over the country, up to our northern neighbors in Canada. It's in the pine family. It is an evergreen. It's native to the Americas. Has a hardiness of zones 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. But very unique tree. I know in Ohio we have some very beautiful hemlock forests, especially in the Hocking Hills area. And you guys in West Virginia have some nice hemlocks too.
We certainly do. I mean, we've had some old growth hemlock areas. Hemlocks are really, really gorgeous trees. They typically grow in very deep, moist soils on the slopes near stream banks a lot of times, and also on craggy rock outcroppings. Hemlocks they're very tenacious trees and they're very patient trees. So they can wait around in the shade for forever. And then when they get sun, they'll pop out and they'll grow. Well, they are slow growers, but they will fill an area and then sort of manage it to their liking. So they like a certain humidity level. They like a certain level of organic matter, and they build all of this stuff themselves and maintain it themselves. So it's really a fascinating feeling being in a hemlock forest. And if you haven't gone hiking in a hemlock forest, I highly recommend doing so. Just to have that feeling, it's just a very different forest than your typical eastern hardwood forest.
So it's in the pine family, so it's softwood. Not that has anything
Now,
to do.
I hate the term hardwood and softwood because, and I used it, right? So I should say deciduous. So a typical deciduous for eastern forest, eastern deciduous forest, and not hardwood.
That's right. And as I was saying, like Hocking Hills, beautiful hemlock forest right there.
Yeah, I haven't been to Hocking Hills yet. I need to go.
Yeah, well, yeah, you better hurry
I know,
because
right?
of what we're going to talk about. So, unfortunately, these beautiful trees and beautiful forests are threatened by another invasive that's been here for a while now.
Yeah.
Around 1951
1951.
was the first spotting of the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid that happened in Richmond, Virginia. And since then, since 2010, it's spread into North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and South Carolina. And also more recently into Western Michigan, because I remember us talking about that not too long ago.
There was a sighting in Illinois. It's creeping west, unfortunately. But, the funny thing about this bug is there are adelgids very similar to this one in the western part of the United States that live on the western hemlocks, but they don't really cause a problem over there.
So is the Western Adelgid native, or is that one also invasive?
That one's actually native, and there's a couple characteristics that we'll get into in a little while that really set apart that native adelgid from this invasive adelgid. There's actually a couple different adelgids, but the one that we're really struggling with, they've genotyped it back to Japan.
Yes. So the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, native to Asia. So you were saying Japan, which isn't
Yeah, yeah,
right, right.
more broadly.
More broadly. And that one does seem to be, I want to say, a lot more damaging to the eastern hemlock. Sounds like than the native Adelgid and the western hemlocks.
Right. And that's just a characteristic of evolution, right? So the Western woolly adelgid grew and evolved with the Western hemlock. And our woolly adelgid grew up with hemlocks in Japan. But when it came to the eastern part of the United States, we didn't have an insect similar to this one. And so our trees evolved without that interaction. And so they didn't build up any defenses to it. And this little teeny bug that is like the size of a pinhead can kill a full grown hemlock tree in like 4 years. And it's just overwhelming because they breed so fast and our trees have no resistance to them.
Yeah, so these adelgids are small aphid-like insects, and what I learned recently is that adelgids are almost always associated with conifers. It's described as an aphid in some pieces of literature, but I think when you and I were talking, they're very similar to scales in that in their life cycle they have a crawler stage and an adult stage that seems to be like cemented to the vascular system of the plant where it feeds.
Yeah, it's sort of like a combination aphid scale insect. So they do have that crawler stage, which is only out there for a very short period of time. And then they will get their nymph stage on. And then they're just these little tiny black specks. It almost looks like a lenticule on the twig. You can barely see them.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a flea almost, right?
Smaller.
Smaller than a flea.
Yeah, it's like think of, if you're looking at a branch of a cherry or a birch, there's those little white spots that go around the branch. Those are called lenticels, and these nymphs are smaller than those. So they're super tiny, and because there's so many of them, they'll look like a little black streak on a twig, but you won't be able to see that they're individual insects unless you have a hand lens or a magnifying glass because 'cause they're just that small.
Yes.
But anyway, when they're crawling, they want to get to the base of a needle. that's where they're going to feed because the tissue is nice and soft and juicy right there. And there's a lot of sap flow going through those needles, which are actually just modified leaves.
Right.
But they'll attach right at the base of those needles. And then for the summertime, they'll just kind of sit there and do nothing. They don't even feed in the summertime. They just kind of hang out because it's too hot.
Yeah, it's way too hot. I agree.
Yeah, and so they just sort of, like, hang out until fall gets here, and then they start feeding very actively, and they'll start drinking all the sap from these trees, and in that process, they become adults and get this woolly coating to them, and that's why it has the name Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, and so you'll see all along the petioles of the needles and the twigs these little tiny white dots. It almost looks like snow in this one little strict area, and it'll be all up and down the branch. And those are the adelgids, those little white spots.
So are these adelgids known for producing galls on the host plant? Woolly galls.
There are gall aphids. There's the Cooley's spruce gall, and it's very similar. So the woolly aphid actually creates a coating on their own body, whereas the gall aphid, again, this is an aphid, not an adelgid, and then the gall aphid will actually cause the tree to grow a gall to protect it.
Adelgids, not aphids. I keep saying that wrong.
But then, yeah, so there's the woolly aphid, and they typically affect spruce. And then there's the woolly adelgid, and they typically affect hemlocks. So, yeah, they're all these little tiny bugs that love to drink sap from trees, just like we do. We just prefer maple sap over hemlock sap.
Well, 100%. That's right.
All right, so it's syrup, it's sweet, it's yummy, and so I can't really blame these bugs for liking it, but it's frustrating because I love my hemlock trees and the devastation that these little teeny tiny bugs have caused all up and down the East Coast along the Blue Ridge Mountain chain. It's just heartbreaking to me because these trees are so slow growing that it's going to be a long time before we get these big giant hemlocks back. So,
Yeah, and listen to this. According to the USDA Forest Service, half the range of the hemlocks in the east are now infested.
oh, that's heartbreaking.
The entire range of eastern
Mm,
hemlock is at risk.
yeah.
And again, we talked about some of the states that were impacted: Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, South Carolina. I think New Jersey was really infested. I want to say it's like the entire state.
Well, the entire state is in the infestation area. So, yeah, there's a lot of entire states included in the range here.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's a pest that does so much damage so quickly. And I 100% agree with you that hemlock forests are a very unique thing. And I guess, now is the time to go see the stuff because we don't know how long it's going to be here, unfortunately.
Which is what's breaking my heart.
That's what I'm saying. Like, as quickly as it can kill a hemlock tree. And like you were saying, right, it has did we talk about the life cycles, Karen?
We kind of started to, but then we got distracted as usual. So, we started talking about the crawler stage, followed by the nymph stage, and then followed by the adult stage where they lay eggs. But the hemlock woolly adelgid has 2 generations per year. So they have the summer stage and the winter stage, we'll call them, or the spring stage. So you have your summer stage where they're crawlers in June. They kind of chill until the hot weather goes away. And then they'll start feeding and they'll start laying eggs. So they're going to complete their life cycle in just less than a year. So from June to March. Now, the spring grouping, those eggs will hatch that were laid in March. And then by the time June gets here, they'll have already gone through their entire life cycle and laid eggs again. So it is a much sped up timeline for those spring-born adelgids.
And the problem is, when we're talking insects, it's not one egg per adult. It's hundreds of eggs per adult.
Mhm.
And you put two breeding cycles in 1 year, it's exponential. It's a quick exponential growth at that, much quicker than just your standard 1 year life cycle of hundreds of eggs, even.
Yeah, and you know what's the scary part about the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is when you talk about sexual reproduction, you have a female and a male. And so about half of your population would be males and not be able to lay eggs, right? Unfortunately, though, the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, they are all females and they don't need a male to lay eggs. So every single one of those eggs can grow up to be a mama Adelgid and lay another set of 300 eggs. So we're talking about some serious exponential growth. It's just you see
Yeah.
one, you better get rid of it.
Yeah, and the Asian longhorn tick is a similar thing.
Mhm.
I know it's a whole different category. It's not even an insect, it's an arachnid. But the Asian longhorn tick also breeds by parthenogenesis, where the female can lay eggs that are essentially clones of itself in an asexual manner, I guess, because you're not breeding two adults. And the thing about the Asian longhorn tick, also very quick, exponential, scary reproductive numbers that can do a lot of damage. So that is something that we find in nature sometimes.
Yeah, parthenogenesis comes from the Greek word meaning virgin birth, and means that you don't have to have a fertilized egg to get an embryo. So, yeah.
Yeah, insects can do anything. And apparently they can kill anything.
Yeah. So, there's a couple ways out there to help control these insects. And one of the things they found is something that only people who have a lot of forest land can do. And that is, it's a silvicultural practice where they would go in and they take out several trees from around the hemlock, giving it more sunlight and more nutrients to grow and fight off this pest. But most everyone out there, if you have a hemlock tree, do not have a great big hemlock forest that they feel comfortable doing a silvicultural treatment of that manner. So, other things that are happening are they have taken the Laricobius beetles from the western part of the United States and brought them over here. And they do enjoy munching on our woolly adelgids. That is the only thing they will eat, however. So we haven't been able to get a sustained population of these predatory beetles that control these insects. But there's also another one. It is a silverfly, and again, these are both native insects. They're just native to the other half of the country. The silverfly is here, but I don't know much about the silverfly. I'll just go ahead and say that.
But I guess it's funny when we say it is native to the US, and you think about how big the US is.
Right? So many
I
different
mean,
ecosystems.
it's especially if you're going from California to the eastern part of the country. I mean, completely different ecology. So, native is kind of a funny term sometimes that we use.
This is true. This is true. So, other things that people are doing to protect their high value hemlock trees. Now, this is a tree that is a very important part of your landscape or your yard, or if you're trying to protect a very specific ecosystem. There are some chemical treatments that do work, and they are a couple of systemic neonicotinoids. And I know neonicotinoids have gotten a really, really bad rap in the past, and not totally unfairly, but they are effective. And when you're looking at a hemlock tree, they are not insect pollinated, they are wind pollinated. So, yes, they are going to have some pollen that goes off site, but for the most part, they're going to be a little bit less likely to impact our pollinators by treating them. Because anytime you're using a systemic insecticide, it is going to go through every part of the plant. And while the impact might not be fatal for the insect, it still can have some sublethal impacts upon the insects and throughout the food chain. So we don't want to use these without caution, just like any pesticide, right, Dan?
Right, right, absolutely. And not to complicate things, but I guess I will in this case. With pollinator, you're right. Most pines, I never say all anymore because it just doesn't work with plants.
Yeah.
But most pines are when pollinated. That's why they produce so much pollen. That's why they coat your car. And that's why my head feels like it's going to explode from the allergies in May. So, when pollinated plants generate a lot of pollen. However, we have seen in areas of high agronomic crop production, specifically things like corn, where you do have beehives, bees do forage corn pollen. So I don't see why they wouldn't forage pine pollen.
So actually, bees don't typically eat pollen from trees in the pine family because it doesn't have much protein in it for them. So they would only be exposed to trace amounts of the pollen from the hemlock trees if it were to fall on a plant that has more desirable or higher protein pollen for them. I mean, there are flowers underneath. So I really can't say yay or nay on the pollination impacts on the canopy floor. However, what we will say is that if those flowers are in bloom, if there are any flowers in bloom at the base of your tree when you're going to treat, we do not recommend using a soil treatment, which other times of the year we do recommend. We would prefer you use a stem-based treatment if there are flowers in bloom when you're using one of these insecticides because it is an insecticide and it will kill insects, right? And so some insects we don't want, like the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, and a lot of insects we do want. So it's a very critical balance. You really have to measure whether the importance of the tree that you're trying to protect and the greater ecosystem surrounding that tree.
Yeah. Whenever you take any action, especially on life, on plants, on animals, whatever, that's not just that there's just so much connections there, right? We talk about the life web, but you're right. Sometimes you have to figure out how to do the most good. And unfortunately, there are off target things that can happen. But in this case, you're left with the best options.
Yeah, it's just like anytime you take a medicine that the doctor gives you, there's going to be side effects, and the doctor has weighed whether or not those side effects are worth the risk, right? Or the impact of the medication is going to be worth the risk brought by the side effects. So, you have to have that conversation with your doctor and you have to have that conversation with your tree, right? So,
Yeah, I was kidding. Yeah, side effects are much better than environmental collateral damage.
there is
Right.
that. That's true. So there's a really great website out there that I want to plug before we run out of time, and it's called savehemlocksnc.org. So this was developed in North Carolina in cooperation with a bunch of different agencies. So it's NC as in North Carolina. So savehemlocksnc.org. Great website, a lot of user-friendly information for how to make soil applications, how to do basal bark treatments and stem treatments, and what chemicals are currently approved and what chemicals are currently working. We have other things that we have to consider with chemicals that we do not have time to go into. So go hiking. Get out in those hemlock forests and enjoy them and breathe their air and feel that difference. Look for those hemlock woolly adelgids. Know that they're coming to a hemlock forest near you. And if they're not in your state yet, please report them as soon as you see them so that your local Division of Natural Resources can take action to protect the forest that you have.
Yeah, and again, what you're going to see is these little white cotton-like puffs at
Mhm.
the base of the needles. So it's, we're talking about very, very small, but you'll notice it. It looks like residual snow.
Mhm. It does. It does.
All right, so quick recap of everything that we discussed today. The eastern hemlocks, native tree to the eastern side of the United States, are being threatened by the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, which is Asian. And it was brought over here, discovered in the 1950s in Virginia, having a devastating impact on the hemlock forests in eastern North America, because it goes up in Canada, right?
Very much so, yes. The eastern hemlock forest range goes all up the East Coast, and this particular insect does not need a mate to lay eggs, and so every egg that hatches can potentially create a female that's gonna lay another 300 eggs. So that is one of the ways they're spreading so quickly up the eastern coast.
Yep, 2 life cycles a year.
And there are some predators out there. They're working on building those populations, and there are some chemical treatments that are effective for protecting certain trees of high value. But always make sure that you read the label, wear your PPE, and if you have questions, ask them. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.